Good evening. Come in from the cold. Settle in. Find your favorite chair, the one that knows the shape of you. Pull the blanket up. Feel its gentle weight, a soft anchor in the quiet of the night. The world outside has gone to sleep. The clamor of the day has faded into a distant memory. The worries and the lists have been put to rest. There is nothing for you to do now, nothing to solve, nothing to prepare for. There is only this room, this moment, and the warmth of the fire. Listen to it, that soft, percussive crackle, the gentle hiss of sap escaping from the wood. It's a sound as old as humanity itself, a sound of safety, of community, of a story, bound to be told. See how the flames dance, painting the walls in shifting shades of orange and gold. They lick at the logs, consuming them slowly, transforming them into heat, into light, into ash. A slow, steady, inevitable process. It is a comforting kind of destruction, a contained chaos that keeps the deeper, colder darkness at bay. Dark, this is the quiet darkness, a place where we can look into the shadows from the safety of the firelight. We won't be exploring tales of frantic horror or shocking violence. No, the stories we'll share here are of a different kind. They are the quiet mysteries, the lingering questions, the disappearances that left behind only echoes and whispers. These are stories that have settled into the landscape like old stones, becoming part of the places where they happened. They are stories that invite contemplation, not fear. They are puzzles with missing pieces, and tonight we will simply hold those pieces up to the firelight, turn them over in our hands, and wonder, Dot. So, let your breathing slow. Let it sink with the gentle, rhythmic pulse of the fire. Inhale the faint, pleasant scent of wood smoke. Exhale the day. Allow the sound of my voice to be just another layer in the room's tranquility, a current in the quiet river of the night, guiding you gently toward the shores of sleep. You don't need to follow every word. Let them wash over you. Your mind can drift, catching a detail here, a name there, like watching embers float up the chimney and disappear into the vast, dark sky. There is no test. There is only the story, the fire, and the quiet, peaceful darkness that surrounds us. Tonight, our story takes us to the hollows of West Virginia, to a time when the country was sighing in relief after a long and terrible war. The year is 1945. The season is Christmas, a time of hope, of family, of light pushing back the winter gloom. We are in the small, bustling coal town of Fayetteville, nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, a place where everyone knows everyone, where the rhythm, bomb of life is dictated by the mine whistle and the changing of the seasons. In this town lived the Sodder family. They were, in many ways, the embodiment of the American dream. The patriarch, George Sodder, had come to the United States from Tula, Sardinia, in Italy, when he was just 13 years old. He arrived in 1908 with an older brother, but his brother soon returned to their homeland, leaving young Giorgio, now George, to make his own way in a new world. He was industrious, intelligent, and driven. He found work on the railroads, carrying water and supplies to the workers, and then found a more permanent home in the rugged landscape of West Virginia. He started his own trucking company, hauling dirt for construction projects, and then coal from the very mines that were the lifeblood of the region. He was a success. He was respected, but he was also an outsider, an Italian immigrant with strong, often loudly stated opinions, particularly his fierce criticism of the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. In a tight-knit community, his outspoken nature made him stand out, and not always in a good way. It earned him a few hushed whispers, a few quiet disagreements. But George was not a man to be silenced. His wife, Jennie, was also the child of Italian immigrants. She was the heart of the Sodder home, a place that was always filled with the sounds of life. Together, George and Jennie had 10 children. 10. Imagine that, a sprawling, boisterous, loving family. The oldest, Joe, was away, serving in the military in the final days of World War II, but the other 9 were at home. John, who was 23, Marion, the oldest daughter, at 17, who worked at a dime store in Fayetteville, and doted on her younger siblings. Then came George Jr., 16, Morris, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jennie, 8, Betty, 5, and the youngest, Sylvia, who was just 2 years old. Their home was a large, 2-story timber frame house, about 2 miles north of the main town, just off Route 16. It was a home filled with music, arguments, laughter, and the organized chaos that comes with a family of that size. George was proud of his family, proud of the life he had built from nothing. He was a strict but loving father. Jennie was a devoted mother, her days filled with the endless tasks of managing such a large household. They were a landmark in their own way, the big Italian family in the house on the highway. As Christmas of 1945 approached, the Sodder house was filled with the usual festive anticipation. The war was over. Their eldest son, Joe, would be home soon. The younger children were giddy with the thought of Santa Claus. On Christmas Eve, the family celebrated as they always did. Marion, the 17-year-old, had brought gifts for her youngest sisters, Jennie, Betty, and Sylvia, from the dime store where she worked. The little ones were so excited, so full of Christmas joy, that they couldn't bear the thought of going to sleep. Begged their mother to let them stay up late, to play with their new toys just a little longer. Jennie, tired from a long day of preparations, finally relented. Morris, Martha, Louis, little Jennie, and Betty could stay up. Marion, the generous older sister, would watch over them. Jennie reminded them that they still had chores to do before they went to bed. The cows needed to be milked, the chickens fed and closed up for the night. The boys, Morris and Louis, groaned but agreed. With that, Jennie, George, and their sons John and George Jr., who had spent the day working with their father, went upstairs to bed around 10 p.m. Little Sylvia, the baby of the family, was already asleep in her crib in her parents' room. The house settled into a familiar nighttime quiet, punctuated only by the happy, muffled sounds of the children playing downstairs. And here, in this quiet moment, the first thread of strangeness was woven into the fabric of the night around. Las 12:30 Alto M. The telephone rang, its sharp, insistent bell cutting through the sleepy silence of the house. Jennie, roused from her sleep, went downstairs to answer it. On the other end of the line was a woman whose voice she didn't recognize. The woman asked for a name Jennie had never heard. Jennie told the caller she had the wrong number. As she did, she could hear a strange sound in the background, the clinking of glasses, loud laughter, a party in full swing. The woman on the phone let out a bizarre, mocking laugh and hung up. Jennie stood there for a moment in the darkened house, the receiver still in her hand. It was an odd call, unsettling in its randomness. But it was late, and people made mistakes. She dismissed it, hung up the phone, and turned to go back to bed. As she did, she noticed something else that was unusual. The children who had stayed up were normally diligent about their evening routines, but tonight the lights were still on downstairs. The curtains, which were always drawn at night, were wide open. She could see Marion asleep on the living room couch. She assumed the other 4 children, weary from their late-night playing, had simply gone up to their attic bedroom and forgotten the rest. She felt a surge of maternal affection, smiled to herself, turned off the lights, drew the curtains, and went back upstairs to her bed. She checked on little Sylvia, sleeping soundly in her crib, and then drifted back to sleep herself. The strange phone call already fading from her mind. Just an hour later, she was awake again. This time, it wasn't a phone call that woke her. It was a sound, a sharp, banging noise on the roof, followed by a loud, rolling sound, as if something heavy had been thrown up there and had rolled down the other side. She sat up, her heart beating a little faster. But the house fell silent again. In the deep quiet of a country night, sounds could be deceiving. Perhaps it was a branch falling, or just the house settling. She listened, hearing nothing more. She convinced herself it was nothing, laid her head back on the pillow, and closed her eyes once more. Sleep found her again, but not for long. At around 1:30 a.m., she woke for the 3rd time, this time to the smell. The acrid, unmistakable smell of smoke. She opened her eyes to a horrifying reality. The room that George used as his office, just off their bedroom, was on fire. A thick, black smoke was pouring from it, filling the upstairs hallway. The next few minutes were a blur of pure, instinctual panic. Jennie screamed, waking George. They grabbed 2-year-old Sylvia from her crib. The 4 of them, George, Jennie, John, and George Jr., who were roused by the commotion, scrambled out of the burning house. Marion, who had been sleeping on the downstairs couch, also made it out. They stood on the frozen lawn, barefoot in the winter night, the heat of the fire pushing them back, and a horrifying realization dawned on them. 5 of their children were still inside. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. They were in Decatic, a space with only one staircase for access, a staircase that was now a roaring inferno. Panic gave way to desperate action. George, a man of immense practical strength, thought of his ladder. He always kept a heavy-duty ladder leaning against the side of the house. It was long enough to reach the attic window. He would climb up, break the window, and pull his children out. He raced around to the side of the house, his eyes stinging from the smoke, his lungs burning. But the ladder wasn't there. It was gone. In the flickering, chaotic light of the fire, he scanned the area. The spot where it always stood was empty. Someone, he thought, must have moved it, maybe borrowed it and not returned it. But who would do that, and why now? There was no time to ponder it. He had to find another way. He thought of his trucks. He had 2 large coal trucks parked nearby. He could pull one of them up to the house, climb on top of it, and reach the attic window. He ran to the first truck, a whirlwind of adrenaline, prep, and terror. He jumped in, turned the key. Nothing. The engine wouldn't turn over. It was dead. He frantically tried again and again, but the truck remained lifeless. He leaped out, ran to the second truck. He turned the key, and again, nothing. Both of his work trucks, which had been running perfectly just that afternoon, were inexplicably dead. The fire was growing, consuming the old wooden house with an insatiable hunger. The sounds were terrifying. The roar of the flames, the crack, form, and splinter of timber, the shattering of glass. The children on the lawn were screaming. Jennie was screaming, a mother's primal cry of anguish and disbelief. They were watching their home, their lives being devoured, and they were utterly helpless. George, refusing to give up, thought of one last thing: the water barrels. They kept barrels of water for emergencies. He ran to them, but the water inside, wash, frozen solid. The December night was bitterly cold, and their last line of defense was a block of useless ice. Meanwhile, Marian, the oldest daughter, had run to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. She frantically tried the phone, but the line was dead. The neighbor, seeing the terrifying glow in the sky, tried their own phone. Also dead. Another neighbor down the road saw the blaze and also tried to call for help, but couldn't get a connection. It was later discovered that the Sodders' telephone line had been cut, not burned through. Someone had deliberately severed their connection to the outside world. Someone finally managed to get through to the fire department by driving into the center of town. But Fayetteville's fire department was a small, volunteer-run operation. The fire chief, a man named F.J. Morris, was the one who initiated the town's telephone system to summon the other firefighters from their beds. In the chaos of the night, the system was slow. It was Christmas. Many of the men were asleep, unreachable, by the time a crew was assembled and the fire engine made its way to the Sodder home. It was far, far too late. The family, shivering in the cold, could only watch as their house, the repository of all their memories, collapsed in on itself. The roof caved in, then the walls, sending a shower of sparks and embers into the dark sky. Within 45 minutes, the home that had been filled with so much life was reduced to a smoking, smoldering pile of ash and debris in a blackened basement. The fire department, which only arrived at 8 o'clock in the morning, full 7 hours after the fire had started, could do little more than poke through the rubble. George and Jennie stood there, numb with shock and grief, surrounded by their 5 surviving children. But their minds were on the 5 who were missing. They clung to a sliver of hope. Perhaps, in the confusion, the children had somehow escaped. Perhaps a passing motorist had seen them on the road and picked them up. But as the cold morning light of Christmas Day broke over the devastating scene, that hope began to dwindle. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, offered the family a grim and to them unbelievable explanation. He told them that the 5 children had perished in the fire. He said the blaze had been so intensely hot that it had completely cremated their bodies, leaving nothing behind. Not a bone, not a tooth, not a single shred of physical evidence to prove they had been there. The official inquest, held just a few days later, declared the fire an accident caused by faulty wiring. The death certificates for Morris, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty Sodder were issued on December 30th for the town of Fayetteville. The case was closed. A terrible, heartbreaking tragedy, but a closed case nonetheless. But for George and Jennie Sodder, it was anything but closed. Their grief was immense, a vast, empty space where 5 of their children used to be. But beneath the grief, seeds of doubt had already begun to sprout. Too many things didn't add up. The strange phone call, the ladder, which was later found tossed into a ravine 75 feet from the house, the 2 trucks that miraculously wouldn't start, the cut phone line, and most hauntingly, the fire chief's assertion that the fire had been hot enough to completely destroy all 5 bodies. George, a practical man, knew a little about fires. He knew that house fires, even intense ones, rarely reached the temperatures of a commercial crematorium, which burns at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for over 2 hours to reduce a body to bone fragments. Their house, made of timber, burned for less than an hour before it collapsed. Surely something should have been left. Skeletons, bones, something. Jennie, in her grief, began to conduct her own quiet experiments. She would burn small animal bones, chicken bones, beef joints, in a fire to see what happened. No matter how hot she made the fire in her stove, the bones would char, but they would not vanish. They remained. This simple domestic experiment solidified a terrifying belief in her heart. Her children had not died in that fire. If they had been in the house, there would be remains. Since there were no remains, they could not have been in the house. The logic was simple, stark, and inescapable. The surviving children also had their own unsettling memories of that night. Sylvia, the youngest, would later talk about seeing a man on the stairs, watching them. John Sodder, one of the sons who escaped, felt a profound and lifelong guilt. He believed he should have done more, should have gone back in. He and his brother, George Jr., were initially suspected by some of being involved. A rumor that added but another layer of torment to their grief. They had slept through the initial commotion, a fact that seemed suspicious to outsiders, but was perhaps just the deep, heavy sleep, of young men exhausted from a day of hard physical labor. So, the family was left in a terrible limbo. The world had told them their children were dead, consumed by a tragic accident. But their hearts, their minds, their own understanding of the world told them a different story. It was a story of foul play, a story where the fire was not an accident, but a cover, a diversion designed to mask something far more sinister, the abduction of 5 of their children. Imagine them, George and Jennie, standing before the smoking crater of their former life on Christmas morning. The smell of wet ash and burnt pine hanging heavy in the cold air. The other families in Fayetteville would be unwrapping presents, singing carols, sitting down to festive meals. But the Sodders were caught in a nightmare. They looked at the ruins, and they did not see a grave. They saw a crime scene. They began to replay every strange event from the weeks leading up to the fire. George recalled a stranger who had come to the house a few months prior, looking for work. The man had wandered to the back of the house and pointed to the 2 fuse boxes. "This is going to cause a fire someday," the man had said. George had thought it was an odd comment, especially since he had just had the wiring in the house completely redone and inspected, and it had been declared perfectly safe. He also remembered another disturbing incident. A different man, trying to sell them life insurance, had become belligerent when George declined. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke," the man had snarled, "and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." The threat was chillingly specific. George, with his outspoken hatred for the Italian dictator, had made enemies. He was part of a vibrant but sometimes fractious Italian-American community, where political loyalties could run dangerously deep. Even thousands of miles from Italy had his words, spoken in passion and conviction, brought this horror upon his family. The pieces began to form a dark and terrifying mosaic in their minds. The threat about his anti-Mussolini remarks, this strange man predicting a fire, the odd phone call just before the blaze, the stolen ladder, the disabled trucks, the cut phone line, and the fire itself, a convenient and terrible distraction. It wasn't a series of tragic coincidences. It was a plan, a coordinated, deliberate, and cruel plan. So, as the fire in your own hearth crackles on, casting a warm and gentle light, picture the cold, gray ashes of the Sodder home. The official story was that 5 children lay beneath them, returned to dust. But for the family, this was just the beginning of a lifelong search. A search for answers that would take them down a rabbit hole of strange sightings, mysterious letters, and tantalizing, heartbreaking clues. They refused to accept the official narrative. They refused to mourn. Instead, they began to search. They believed with every fiber of their being that their children were out there somewhere, alive. The fire hadn't been the end of their story. It was the violent, inexplicable beginning of their disappearance. The local authorities, however, were content to let the matter rest. They had their explanation faulty wiring. They had their death certificates. To them, the Sodders were a family undone by grief, unable to accept a terrible truth, spinning elaborate fantasies to cope with an unbearable loss. The family's insistence on foul play was dismissed as denial. Their questions were met with bureaucratic shrugs and weary sighs. But George and Jennie Sodder would not be dismissed. They knew what they knew, and they knew their children were gone, not dead. And so began a quest that would span decades, a testament to a parent's undying hope in the face of the quiet, terrible darkness of the unknown. They would spend the rest of their lives and all of their money looking for 5 ghost children, lost in the smoke and confusion of a long-ago Christmas Eve. The fire had taken their home, but it had ignited in them a different kind of fire, burning, unquenchable need for the truth. And that truth, they were certain, was not buried in the ashes. We will leave them there for now. Standing in the cold dawn of a Christmas, they would never forget the enormity of their loss and the depth of the mystery before them just beginning to take shape. The fire is out. The house is gone. The children have vanished, and the questions have just begun to form. Rising from the rubble like smoke, the log in your fireplace shifts, sending a fresh cascade of sparks upward. The warmth on your face is real, a gentle comfort against the chill of the story. Let the questions settle. Let the mystery be. There is nothing to solve tonight. There is only the listening, the wondering, and the slow, steady descent into rest. The quiet darkness of this room is a safe harbor, a world away from the darkness that fell over Fayetteville on that cold December night. Welcome back. Let your body settle deeper into its resting place. Let the warmth from the fire smooth away the edges of the day. The world outside is still. The night is a deep, quiet pool, and we are floating here in its calmest corner. The story we left behind is waiting for us, resting in the cold ashes of a Christmas morning in 1945. We left George and Jennie Sodder standing before the ruins of their home, their hearts fractured by a terrible choice, to accept the unbearable, be story of a tragic fire, or to embrace the equally agonizing story of a monstrous crime. They chose the crime. They chose to believe their children were alive. This belief was not born of delusion or an inability to face grief. It was born of facts that gnawed at them, inconsistencies that buzzed like flies in the quiet room of their sorrow. The world wanted them to build a memorial, to carve 5 names onto a tombstone. But George and Jennie Sodder began to build something else entirely. They began to build a case. Their first obstacle was the very system that should have been their greatest ally. The Fayetteville Police Department and the local coroner's office had closed the book on the Sodder fire with a speed that the family found unnerving. The official cause of death was fire or suffocation. The cause of the fire was deemed to be faulty wiring. It was neat. It was simple. It was, to the Sodders, a lie. They pleaded with the authorities to look closer. They presented their list of strange occurrences, the threatening insurance salesman, the odd man who had warned of a fire, the late-night phone call, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the cut phone line. These were not the hallmarks of an accident. They were the components of a conspiracy, but their pleas were met with a kind of weary paternalism. They were grieving parents. They were told it was understandable that they would look for someone to blame, for a more complex reason for their suffering. But a tragedy was just that, a tragedy. There was no need to make it more than it was. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, stuck to his story. The fire had been hot enough to cause a complete holocaust, he said, leaving no trace of the 5 children. When George pointed out that some household appliances had been found in the debris, warped but recognizable, Morris had no convincing answer for why they would survive when human bones would not. The inquest was a formality, a rubber stamp on the official conclusion. The death certificates were issued, and the town of Fayetteville was encouraged to move on. But George and Jennie could not. To move on would be to abandon their children a second time. So, with the door to official help firmly closed, they opened their own. They took the money they had saved, the profits from George's successful trucking business, and they redirected it from building a future to investigating the past. They began their own private investigation. Their first act was one of public, unyielding hope. In 1952, at the site of their burned-out home on Route 16, they erected a billboard. It was large and stark against the green backdrop of the Appalachian Hills. On it were the pictures of the 5 missing children. Morris, age 14, with his serious, steady gaze. Martha, 12, a hint of a smile on her face. Louis, 9, looking like a little man in his collared shirt. Jennie, 8, with her bright, curious eyes. And Betty, the youngest at 5, her face round and cherubic. Beneath their portraits, in large, clear letters, the billboard laid out the mystery. Sends a reward. At first, it was $5,000, a substantial sum for the time. Later, they would double it to $10,000. The billboard asked for any information, any clue that could lead to the recovery of their children. That billboard became a fixture of the landscape. For travelers driving through the winding roads of West Virginia, it was an eerie and heartbreaking landmark. It was a constant public refusal to forget. For decades, it stood there, the children's faces fading slightly in the sun, their painted eyes looking out over the passing traffic as if searching for their parents in the crowd. It was a monument not to death, but to absence, a testament to a parent's belief that their children were not in the ground beneath it, but out there, somewhere in the vastness of America. The billboard weathered storms and changing seasons, a silent, stubborn question mark on the side of the highway. It was the family's heart, turned inside out and nailed to a piece of wood for all the world to see. While the billboard stood its silent vigil, George and Jennie chased down every lead, no matter how faint or fantastic. They traveled thousands of miles, following whispers and rumors. And the whispers came. A story began to circulate. A story that the authorities had dismissed, but which resonated deeply with the Sodders. A woman who worked at a small hotel in Charleston, about 50 miles west of Fayetteville, contacted them. She claimed that on the morning of Christmas Day, just hours after the fire, she had seen the children. They were in the company of 2 men and 2 women, all of whom she described as being of Italian extraction. The group had arrived in a car with Florida license plates, checking into the hotel late at night. The woman said the adults were aggressive and kept the children at a distance, refusing to let them speak to anyone. She said she tried to be friendly with the children, but the adults glared at her with hostility and spoke rapidly in Italian, which she did not understand. They had checked out early the next morning. Was this the lead they had been praying for? George and Jennie clung to it. Florida, it seemed so far away, so random. But it was a destination, a direction. George tried to convince the FBI to look into the sighting, but the report was deemed hearsay, and without more concrete evidence. They were unwilling to intervene in what was considered a local matter. Another sighting surfaced closer to home. A woman who operated a tourist rest stop between Fayetteville and Charleston swore she had served breakfast to the children on Christmas morning. She didn't remember the exact time, only that it was very early, and they were with a group of adults in a car. She recalled it because it was so unusual to see a large family traveling on Christmas Day. Then there were the more scattered, sporadic reports that came in over the years, often prompted by the billboard or by newspaper articles, about the case. A woman in St. Louis wrote to the family, claiming that their daughter Martha was living in a convent there. A patron in a Texas bar overheard a drunken man bragging about his involvement in a famous kidnapping that happened in West Virginia. On a Christmas Eve years ago, a woman in Central Florida sent a letter saying that one of the Sodder boys, Louis, had revealed his true identity to her one evening. Each one of these leads was a small, sharp pinprick of hope in the vast darkness, of their uncertainty, and each one led to a dead end. George would travel to the convent in St. Louis, only to find no one matching Martha's description. The man in the Texas bar was never identified. The trail to the man in Florida went cold. With every failed lead, the family had to absorb a fresh wave of disappointment. The emotional cost was immense. Imagine the hope surging in your chest as you drive for days, convinced you are about to be reunited with your child, only to have that hope collapse into nothing. Yet they never stopped. To stop would be to give up, and they would not give up. As the years passed, George and Jennie began to focus more on the how and why of that night. The motive remained a consuming question. The threat from the insurance salesman, "Your children are going to be destroyed," for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini played over and over in George's mind. He was known for his passionate arguments with other members of the Italian-American community. Fascism was a deeply divisive issue, and George had never hidden his contempt for Mussolini and his regime. Was it possible that this was a political vendetta, a punishment for his outspokenness, carried out by fascist sympathizers? This line of thinking led them to a darker more organized possibility. The Mafia, the Black Hand, as it was sometimes known, was notorious for its extortion rackets within Italian immigrant communities. They would demand protection money from successful business owners. George, with his thriving trucking company, would have been a prime target. He was a proud and stubborn man. It was easy to imagine him refusing to pay, refusing to be intimidated. Perhaps the fire was a warning that had spun horribly out of control. Or perhaps the kidnapping itself was the goal: to take the children, bind, and demand a ransom that was, for some reason, never communicated. The idea of his children in the hands of organized criminals was a torment, but it provided a framework, a logic, however brutal, to the chaos of that night. Feeling stonewalled by local law enforcement, George took another step. He hired a private investigator from a nearby town, a man named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley listened to the family's story, reviewed their evidence, and began to dig. He was the first person in any official capacity to give their theory of abduction serious consideration, and he soon uncovered a bizarre and disturbing piece of information. Tinsley learned through local gossip and by speaking to townspeople who were afraid to talk to the police, that Fire Chief F.J. Morris had apparently made a strange discovery in the ashes of the Sodder home. According to this rumor, Morris had found a human heart. Instead of reporting this crucial piece of evidence, he had allegedly packed it into a metal dynamite box and secretly buried it. The story was that he did this to spare the family the additional pain of seeing it. When George Sodder confronted Morris with this rumor, the fire chief's reaction was startling. He didn't deny it, he admitted it. He took George to the spot where he claimed to have buried the box. They dug it up. Inside, however, was not a human heart. It was a beef liver, a fresh beef liver, which had clearly not been in a fire. Maurice's explanation for this was that he had put the liver in the box and buried it in the hope that if the Sodders found it, they would believe some remains had been recovered and would be satisfied, allowing them to finally accept their children's deaths and find peace. This explanation was, to put it mildly, unbelievable. It was grotesque. It suggested either that the fire chief was a man of stunningly poor judgment and bizarre methods, or that he was lying, trying to cover something up with an absurd story. To the Sodders, it was proof of a cover-up. Why would the fire chief go to such lengths to plant false evidence? Was he part of the conspiracy? Was he incompetent? Or was he being intimidated by someone else, forced to obstruct the path to the truth? Whatever the reason, the family's faith in any official explanation was now completely shattered. This bizarre incident with the beef liver spurred George to take the most drastic step yet. He could no longer trust what anyone else told him about what was or was not in the ashes of his home. He had to see for himself. In August of 1949, nearly 4 years after the fire, he decided to excavate the site. He brought in a bulldozer and began to carefully move the earth that he had used to fill in the basement, turning his former homestead into a small, grassy memorial park for his children. He wanted to turn back time to sift through the soil and debris layer by layer, searching for the definitive proof that had been denied to him. The excavation was a somber public event. Neighbors and curious onlookers gathered to watch as George, a father literally digging for the bones of his children, scraped away the dirt. For hours, they found nothing but the detritus of a burned-down life, twisted metal, fragments of household items and coins. But then they found something, several small, hard objects. They looked like fragments of bone. They were small, chalky, bite against the dark earth. George carefully collected them. There were 5 in total. They appeared to be pieces of vertebrae. Here, at last, was physical evidence. It was a grim discovery, but it was something tangible. George and Jennie's hearts must have been a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. If these were their children's bones, it meant their long search had been based on a false hope. It meant the children had died in the fire after all. But it would also be an answer, an end to the agonizing uncertainty. George, ever the meticulous investigator, wanted the best PERN analysis possible. He contacted a pathologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., Dr. Marshall T. Newman. He carefully packaged the bone fragments and sent them off for examination. Then the family waited. They waited for the dispassionate voice of science to tell them the truth of what lay buried in their cellar. The report that came back from the Smithsonian was a bombshell. It was a definitive answer, but it was not the answer anyone expected. Dr. Newman confirmed that the fragments were human bones specifically for lumbar vertebrae. He stated they all came from the same person. He was able to determine the age of the individual, which he placed between 16 and 22 years old. He also made a final, crucial observation. The bones showed no signs of ever being exposed to fire. Think about that for a moment. Let the implications settle. The bones were not from any of the 5 missing children. The oldest child they lost was Morris, who was 14. The youngest was Betty, who was 5. None of them were in the 16 to 22 age range, and the bones had not been in the fire. So, who did they belong to? And how did they end up in the basement of the Sodder home? The discovery threw the entire case into a new realm of strangeness. A body, or part of a body, that had nothing to do with the Sodder children had been buried in the filled dirt of their basement. Had George inadvertently scooped them up from somewhere else when he was hauling dirt to fill the hole where his house used to be? It was possible he worked in excavation, after all. Or was it something more sinister? Were the bones planted there? Perhaps to be found later in a fake investigation to provide false closure. But if so, why use bones of the wrong age? This finding, which should have provided clarity, only deepened the shadows. It did, however, accomplish one thing for the Sodder family. It definitively proved that the official story was wrong. If the fire had been hot enough to cremate 5 children's bodies completely, it would have at least scorched these vertebrae. The fact that the bones were unburned, combined with their incorrect age, was, for the Sodders, the final nail in the coffin of the accidental fire theory, but proved to them that there were no remains of their children in the ashes, because their children had not been in the house when it burned. So now they were left with a mystery that had grown even more complex. They had a fire that was almost certainly arson. They had 5 missing children. And now they had a set of unidentified human remains buried on their property that belonged to a complete stranger. The search was no longer just for their children. It was also for the story behind these phantom bones. Let the scene fade. The bulldozer is silent. George Sodder is holding a handful of small bones, a clue that only leads to more questions. The sun is setting over the West Virginia hills, casting long shadows over the billboard where the faces of his children stare out into the twilight. Their hope has been vindicated. The official story is a lie, but the truth they seek is now further away than ever, obscured by false leads, strange discoveries, and the passage of time. Breathe in the warmth of the fire in this room. Let it be a shield against the chill of this story. The mystery is not yours to solve. Let the questions drift like the gentle smoke rising from the logs. There is comfort in the knowing that some stories have no easy answers, that some shadows are too deep to be fully illuminated. There is only the tale itself, the crackle of the fire, and the peaceful, quiet darkness that waits to embrace you. Come back to the warmth. The story is not over, but the night is growing deeper. The world has tucked itself in, and soon you will too. We left the Sodder family in a place of profound and unsettling contradiction. They had dug into the earth beneath their former home and found proof, not proof of their children's fate, but proof that the official story was a fabrication. The unburned vertebrae of a stranger, discovered in the filled dirt, confirmed their deepest suspicions. Their children had not perished in the fire. This discovery should have been a victory, a catalyst for a new official investigation. But instead, it simply left them more alone with their mystery than ever before. They now knew with scientific certainty that they were right, but they were no closer to knowing where Morris, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty were. And so the years began to spool out, long and slow. The 1950s bled into the 1960s. The surviving Sodder children grew up, married, and had children of their own. The world changed. The Cold War raged. Men walked on the moon, and the cultural fabric of America was rewoven time and again. But on a stretch of highway in Fayetteville, West Virginia, time stood still. The billboard remained. The faces of the 5 lost children gazed out at a world that was moving on without them. For George and Jennie, the search became the central rhythm, bioth of their lives. It was their vocation, their penance, their purpose. Every spare dollar, every spare moment was dedicated to it. Their home, the new, smaller house they built not far from the site of the fire, became a command center for the investigation. Maps were pinned to the walls, covered in lines and circles, tracing potential sightings. Files overflowed with letters from psychics, well-meaning strangers, and cruel pranksters. Every letter was read, every potential lead, no matter how outlandish, was considered. They lived in a state of permanent alert, waiting for the phone call or the piece of mail that would finally break the case and bring their family back together. It was an exhausting, heart-shredding way to live, a life sentence of hope. George, once a robust and powerful man, grew older, his body stooped by the weight of the years and the burden of not knowing. Jennie retreated into a quiet, devout sorrow. She tended her garden, a riot of life and color that stood in stark contrast to the barren patch of land where her house once stood. She prayed constantly. They were a familiar, tragic sight in the community, the old couple who had lost their children and, in a way, had lost themselves in the search. Some admired their tenacity. Others pitied what they saw as a refusal to accept reality. But no one could deny the power of their conviction. Then, in 1968, 23 years after the fire, something happened. Something that jolted the family out of the slow, grinding rhythm of their long wait. A letter arrived in their mailbox. It was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. There was no return address. The envelope was addressed simply to the Sodder family. Jennie opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of a man in his late 20s or early 30s. He was handsome, with dark, wavy hair, a strong jaw, and deep-set eyes that stared directly and intensely into the camera. He bore a striking, undeniable resemblance to their son Louis. It was Louis, but grown up. The same arched eyebrows, the same shape of the nose. To a mother's eye, it was him. There could be no doubt. Jennie's heart, which had been beating in a slow, steady rhythm of grief for over 2 decades, began to race. After all this time, after so many false trails and dead ends, was this it? Was this a message from their long-lost boy? She turned the photograph over. On the back, written in a confident, slightly slanted script, was a cryptic message. It read, "Louis, Sodder I love brother Frankie boys, 90132 or 35. The message was a puzzle box of hope and confusion. Louis Sodder. It was a direct claim of identity. I love brother Frankie. This was perhaps the most compelling detail. The Sodders had another son, an older brother to the missing children. But his name was John, not Frank. However, the Sodder family was large, and family nicknames were common. Was Frankie a private nickname for John, or perhaps for another brother that only a true family member would know? The family couldn't recall a Frankie, but the possibility lingered. Little boys. What could that mean? A typo for little boys. A code. A reference to something only Louis would understand. And the numbers, a 90132 or 35. They were precise, specific. Was it part of a military serial number? A prison identification number? A postal code? It was a clue tantalizingly close to being meaningful, but just out of reach of interpretation. The photograph and its strange message electrified the family. It was the most concrete piece of evidence they had received in 23 years. It was not a vague sighting or a second-hand story. It was a face, a name, a message. George, more cautious after years of bitter disappointments, examined the photo under a magnifying glass. He agreed. The resemblance to his family, to the way Louis had looked as a boy, was uncanny. For Jennie, there was no need for caution. She knew. A mother knows her child. This was her son, reaching out to them across the years, across the silence. They immediately sprang into action. They hired another private investigator, a man who came highly recommended, and gave him the photograph and a large sum of money. His mission was simple: go to Central City, Kentucky, and find the man in the picture. Find Louis. The investigator took the case, expressed his confidence, and set off for Kentucky. The Sodder family waited, their hopes higher than they had been since that terrible Christmas Eve. They imagined the reunion. They imagined Louis explaining where he had been, where his siblings were. They imagined the end of their long nightmare. But the nightmare had one more cruel twist in store for them. The private investigator went to Kentucky, and then he vanished. He never reported back. He never returned their calls. He took their money and simply disappeared, melting back into the world, taking their best and last hope with him. It was a devastating betrayal. They were left with nothing but the photograph and the cryptic message, a clue that led nowhere. But they would not be defeated. Even after this crushing blow, they held onto the photograph. It was a treasure. It was proof. George and Jennie made a difficult decision. They decided to update the billboard. They had a new, enlarged copy of the photograph made, and they placed it in the center of the board, replacing the faded picture of the 9-year-old boy with the image of the handsome, mysterious man from Kentucky beneath it. They revised the text, now asking for information about the man in the new picture. The new billboard was even more haunting than the original. It suggested that one of the children had survived into adulthood, that he was out there, alive in 1968. It deepened the mystery and broadcast their enduring hope to a new generation of passers-by. But the billboard, like all their other efforts, yielded nothing. No one in Central City, Kentucky, or anywhere else came forward to identify the man. He remained a ghost, a face in a photograph, a flicker of light that had appeared for a moment before being swallowed again by the darkness. The effort, the hope, and the ultimate crushing disappointment of the Louis photograph took a profound toll on George Sodder. He had spent a third of his life and his entire fortune searching for his children. A year after the letter arrived, in 1969, George passed away. His family said he died of a broken heart. He went to his grave without ever knowing what happened to his 5 children. His deepest conviction, until his last breath, was that they had been kidnapped and were still alive somewhere. He had never wavered. Jennie lived on for another 20 years. She wore black every day for the rest of her life, a constant, visible symbol of her mourning. She continued to tend the memorial garden she had planted at the site of the fire, a beautiful, heartbreaking tribute to her lost children. She never spoke of them as being dead. She would talk about them as if they might walk through the door at any moment. She surrounded herself with her surviving children and her many grandchildren, but there was always a quiet, hollow space in her heart that the 5 missing ones had occupied, with Jennie's passing in 1989, the driving force behind the public. Search was gone. The surviving family members, now with families of their own, made the difficult decision to take the billboard down. After more than 40 years, the silent landmark on Route 16 was removed. To the outside world, it might have looked like the family was finally giving up, finally accepting the unacceptable. But the search never truly ended. It simply went quiet. It moved from a public quest to a private inheritance, a mystery passed down from one generation to the next. The youngest surviving child, Sylvia, who was just 2 years old on the night of the fire and was carried from the flames by her father, became the family's unofficial historian and spokesperson. She never stopped believing her siblings had survived. That night, she grew up in the shadow of their absence, her entire life shaped by a crime she was too young to remember. So, what are we left with here in the warmth of our own quiet darkness? We are left with a story that has no end, a puzzle with too many pieces missing. The questions linger, hanging in the air like the scent of wood smoke. What really happened? On Christmas Eve of 1945, the theory that has always felt the most plausible to the family and to those who have studied the case is the one rooted in George Sodder's outspoken criticism of Mussolini. It suggests a vendetta carried out by fascist sympathizers or members of a local organized crime outfit. The crime was meticulously planned. Someone watches the house, learning the family's routines. Someone steals the ladder to prevent an escape from the upper floor. Someone sabotages the trucks to prevent pursuit or access. Someone cuts the phone, line to isolate them. Then, under the cover of darkness, an incendiary device, perhaps the object Jennie heard thudding on the roof, is used to start the fire. The fire is not the main event. It's a diversion. While the family is panicked and distracted, scrambling to save themselves, accomplices enter the house and abduct the 5 sleeping children from their beds. They are spirited away in a waiting carper, perhaps the one with Florida license plates, seen at the hotel in Charleston. In this scenario, what was the ultimate goal? Was it ransom? If so, why was a demand never made? Perhaps the plan went wrong. Perhaps the kidnappers were identified and had to go to ground, unable to complete their extortion plot. Or was the goal never money? Was it simply to punish George Sodder in the cruelest way imaginable, by taking his children and leaving him in a permanent state of torment, never knowing if they were alive or dead? This seems almost too monstrous to contemplate, yet it fits the chilling threat made by the insurance salesman. Your children are going to be destroyed, not killed. Destroyed. The destruction of a family through endless uncertainty is a unique and terrible kind of vengeance. And what of the children? If they were taken, what became of them? Were they killed shortly after the abduction? Or did they live on, as the Kentucky photograph suggests? Perhaps they were separated and sold into illegal adoptions. raised in new families under new names, with no memory of their life in West Virginia. It's a sad but not impossible fate. In the chaos of the post-war era, such things could happen. Perhaps they were told their parents had died in the fire, and they grew up believing they were orphans. They could have lived out full lives, never knowing that a family was desperately searching for them, that their faces were on a billboard on a lonely mountain road. And what of the strange players in this drama? The fire chief, F.J. Morris, with his bizarre story of the buried beef liver. Was he a bumbling fool trying to comfort a grieving family in the most misguided way possible? Or was he a pawn in a larger game, threatened or paid off to ensure the fire was ruled an accident and that no serious investigation ever took place? His actions remain one of the most inexplicable parts of the story. The questions are endless. Who was the woman who made the strange phone call? Who was the man in the photo from Kentucky? Why did he send it, and why did he disappear? What is the story of the unidentified bones found in the cellar? The mystery is a tapestry woven from these dark, unanswered threads. We will never know the answers. The trail has gone cold, buried under more than 75 years of silence. All the principal figures, George, Jennie, the fire chief, the private investigators, and likely the perpetrators themselves, long gone. The missing children, if they survived, would be old now, in their 80s and 90s. The truth, if it ever existed in a form that could be found, has almost certainly faded into the past, as ephemeral as smoke. But the story endures. It endures as a chilling piece of American folklore. It endures as one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. But most of all, it endures as a testament to the ferocious, unyielding power of a family's love. It is a story about a fire that could not burn away hope, and a silence that could not erase memory. The fire in your hearth is burning low now. The logs have crumbled into a soft, pulsating bed of red and orange embers. The heat is gentle, a soft blush in the air. The house around you is still and safe. The story of the Sodder family belongs to the past, a sad, strange tale told in the firelight. Let the questions go. Let the mystery dissolve into the deep, restful quiet of the night. There is nothing left to figure out. There is nothing left to do but to let go. Let your own mind grow quiet. Let your breathing be slow and even, like the gentle pulse of the embers. The quiet darkness is here, but it is a friend. It is a soft blanket, a peaceful end to the day. The story is over. It is time for sleep. Good night.